have these folks here today. First, I'll give a brief introduction, but right now I'll introduce really quickly the speakers that we have. First, we have Roland Adjuli. He's a resident scholar at Arcadia University and a member of the UN Working Group on Arbitrary Detention, originally from Benin. So he's come a long way to be with us today. We have Malik to my right, who was the former president of the UN Working Group on Arbitrary Detention, and still follows Michel's case and others very closely. We have our friend Jared Genter, Managing Director of Cursia Strategies and founder of Freedom Now, who's also done a lot of great work on Michel's case, so he'll speak a bit about that, and then we'll turn it over to the man of the hour, Michel Ntangana, for his presentation. So just to sort of set the backdrop really quickly, I know there was a brief introduction in the email invitation that you all got, but nearly 2 decades ago, on May 12, 1997, Cameroonian security agents apprehended Michel without a warrant and placed him in solitary confinement in a basement cell. During court proceedings that did not meet international standards for a fair trial, Michel was ultimately sentenced to 15 years imprisonment for the alleged embezzlement of public funds. In October 2012, 2 years after his sentence should have been completed and while still illegally detained, Michel's sentence was extended to 20 additional years for the same charges. In November 2013, while Malik was head of the UN Working Group, they declared that he had been arbitrarily detained for 17 years, 15 of which were spent in solitary confinement, and the prison system routinely described as overcrowded and in which conditions are life-threatening, including use of torture and widespread abuse of detainees. Several months thereafter, President Paul Biya signed a decree reducing Michel's sentence, and in February 2014 he was freed, with a caveat, however, that none of the recommendations from the UN Working Group were respected, which remain at least to this day. These recommendations include an investigation into Michel's arrest and punishment for those depriving him of his liberty, as well as compensation for the harm caused to him. And as we all know, unfortunately, the case we'll be speaking about today is not an isolated incident. The use of arbitrary detention against dissident critics and human rights defenders, including Michel, has been a commonly used tactic by governments the world over. In its last report, the UN Working Group on Arbitrary Detention adopted 60 opinions concerning the detention of 431 persons in 39 different countries. It also published a total of 110 urgent appeals to 37 states concerning 680 individuals. And during President Paul Biya's nearly 4-decade tenure in office, his government has systematically repressed human and political rights, as well as civil liberties, including the rights to free speech, freedom of expression, and association. What is more, Cameroon security forces often act with impunity for human rights violations that include excessive force, torture, as well as extrajudicial executions. And although Cameroon's first Senate was elected 2 years ago, members have little authority and often serve as mere rubber stamps for President Biya's directives. And despite being 82 years old and entering his 4th decade in office, he shows no sign of choosing a successor, and also all signs point to his running for re-election in 2018. And with that, we'll turn it over to Roland for his remarks.
Good afternoon, everyone. So I will talk about giving you a background about the working group, what we do about Cameroon specifically, how much arbitrary detention we have in Cameroon, and even though there are very few, because it's only 7 cases we have had until now, you will see that there is a pattern of systematic violation based on certain ground, which shows a system designed to oppress certain type of individuals. So the Working Group on Arbitrary Detention was established by the Commission for Human Rights of the United Nations as a mechanism, a special procedure mechanism, where individuals could complain about them being arrested, detained arbitrarily. And the working group has established 5 categories of what arbitrary detention would be. Either you are deprived of liberty without legal basis, so you are arrested without any ground, or you have been arrested because you try to exercise your rights, your freedom established in the Universal Declaration or in the International Covenant. You have been detained, you face trial, but your rights, your federal rights have been violated so seriously that it affects the legal basis for the detention. Or you are an asylum seeker and you have been administratively detained so long that it turned into detention, arbitrary detention. And the fifth one, you are detained for a discriminatory ground. Any of those 5 instances, the working group will consider it as arbitrary detention. And the working group issue reasonably 60 decisions every year. That's just one part of what the working group does, because the working group also work with states in a country visit to assess the system vis-a-vis arbitrary detention and help them through a constructive dialogue to prevent arbitrary detention in the future. States don't like it that much, even though it's the less harmful, because it's a dialogue process where the working group communicate with the state throughout. It's not an inquisitorial process as if when one will be complaining about this system. And the working group has been in place since 1991. I'm talking under his control. So 1991 until now. When you look at the record of the working group, I have the confidential report. The countries we have had the most case about are China, Peru, not African country. The African country, usually they have about 5 to 20 cases we have had until now. What's the reason? People don't know about the working group. Michel has been detained for about 12, 15 years before the lawyers from Paris decided to come to the working group. If they had known from day one, they would have come. So people don't come because they don't know about it. So even if you have only 7 cases about Cameroon, it doesn't mean that there is not that much an issue in Cameroon. It's because very few people detained in Cameroon are aware of the existence of the working group and are able to use the mechanism. But the cases we have had are emblematic and are revealing of what is going on in Cameroon. So Michel's case, I will let Malik talk a little bit more about it. Recently, we have the case of Paul-Eric Kengwe. He is a young mayor of a city in Cameroon who fortunately was a member of the ruling party. He joined the ruling party because he believed in the agenda, but he had a secondary agenda, fighting for good governance, ensuring that corruption is not part of the way he will manage his administration. And he was outspoken about it. The government didn't like it. He was arrested, detained, and accused of embezzlement, corruption, fraud, all kinds of things he has been fighting against. Against companies' interests, company who came to trial and said, no, the man has not taken any money from us. Even the commune he is supposed to have been abusing, the commune chief's financial officer comes in court and says, we checked the account, there is nothing wrong. There is strictly nothing wrong. He came to the working group. The working group issued an opinion in 2014. And in that opinion, you will see how the system is explained, and the working group expressed its concern about how the judiciary is being manipulated in Cameroon. The working group stated that the corruption practice in Cameroon is so heavy that there is no process you could trust. The minute a politician wants your head, you are done. You are off the road. The judiciary cannot be trusted because whatever they do, you could see flaws in it at every stage. And you'll see in Michel's case how that judiciary has been manipulated. And Kengwe is still in detention until now. We had the case of Bengono, also 2014. He was the chief financial officer of the Aéroport du Cameroon, the airport in Cameroon. He's accused of corruption. Interestingly, When he come to the working group, he's not challenging the corruption allegation. Is it true? It's none of my business. But he accused the judiciary for having violated his rights, the police for having arrested him without any warrant of arrest. And all these elements are fully proven in the proceedings. And the working group also concludes that he was arrested without legal basis. His federal right has been violated. On top of that, he's sick and he needs medical attention. And they are not letting him get that medical attention. So you have again the law enforcement system being used to abuse gay individuals, and you have the judiciary, which does rubber stamp anything coming from the politician. And the last case we had, the opinion has not been issued yet, so I will not go into detail about it. But at least the facts are public knowledge because the applicant made it public. Okay? It's again a lawyer who apparently had a contract with the Ministry of Finance and has done some work for them and was duly paid, and transaction occurred through her account. She is alleging that because people within the government didn't get as much as they were expecting, they want to knock her down. So the Attorney General will initiate a case against her for corruption. And the Ministry of Finance will go to court and say, we had no issue. The woman has done her work and got her money paid, and there was nothing wrong in the way she managed the transaction for us. So you ask yourself, if your client doesn't see anything wrong, where will the Attorney General get the evidence from? And especially when the Attorney General and the client are all part of the same government. Okay? You have, in all those cases, first, a big issue of good governance in the country. Cameroon, Biya has been in power since early 1980. And he's still in power until now, until 2018, and he will be running again. He's over 80 years old. He ran a country where there is no cabinet meeting. I'm talking under the control of the Cameroonian. The ministers, they don't meet. Each of them run the business in conjunction with whoever they are close to the president, and communicate whatever information they want. You are appointed cabinet member, you hear it on the radio. It's a social redistribution, a way of getting people from every group in the country in power on a temporary basis, so that your group benefits and they shut up, and we move on. And he can continue doing his business, running the country half-time away, because he spent 6 months in hotels in Geneva every year. And the remaining of the time is in his village. That's how he runs the country. So good governance is a serious issue. And that has developed a culture, I would say, lack of political awareness in the country, but it's very deep, because nobody at any stage, or very few, will think that there is anything wrong about how politics is managed in the country. You have, in addition to the good governance, to the political circumstance, you have overall corruption, including in the judiciary sector. The judicial system in Cameroon is heavily corrupt, and there is no way you can trust anything out of the process. And if you read your opinion about Kengwe, the working group has stated clearly that it's concerned that in several cases, the allegation of corruption within the judiciary has been coming up, and is the basis of its decision that there was an arbitrary detention. And the working group referred it to the special rapporteur on the independence of the judiciary, so that it's further investigated and reported about. There is finally an issue of competence. Whatever public office you will hold, it's not based on your ability, on your skills. It's based on who you represent, who the president wants to recognize through your appointment. As a result, you go back to first point, good governance. If you appoint someone to please his community, he will not deliver. He will deliver for the community what the community is expecting, not for the public good of the country as a whole. So even though we have only 7 cases since the working group has been established, these features are clearly established throughout those cases. I will stop there, and if there are questions, I could elaborate more. Thank you.
Thank you so much, and I think now we'll turn it over to Malik, and for those who are not francophone, big thanks to my colleague Chloe, who will be translating for those of us.
I should have seen French.
Good morning, everybody. Thank you very much. My English is not very good. I'm going to express myself in French, if you want. Je ne reviendrai pas sur tout ce que mon collègue vient de dire, et le cas de M. Atangana s'inscrit dans cet cadre-là, mais dans des proportions beaucoup plus importantes.
I will go back to the case of Michel Tangana and to emphasize how it fits into this context of repression in Cameroon.
Je ne reviendrai pas également sur tout ce que Michel Tangana a subi comme atrocité, comme humiliation, comme dégradation, comme violation de ses droits pendant 17 ans. Et c'est pratiquement par un miracle qu'il est là aujourd'hui avec nous.
Also, I will not come back on what Michel Tangana went through during his 17 years of imprisonment, the violation of his human rights, the humiliation, the mistreatment. It's actually a miracle that he's here today with us.
Si je suis ici ce matin en compagnie de mon collègue qui m'a succédé au groupe de travail, et j'ajoute, si je suis là ce matin en compagnie de mon collègue Adjovi qui m'a succédé au groupe de travail que j'ai présidé pendant 6 ans, ici ajoute que nous devions venir avec M. Louis Joigny, qui est un membre fondateur du groupe de travail, qui soutient notre action. Et s'il n'a pas pu être là ce matin, c'est pour des problèmes de santé. Si nous tous nous mobilisons autour de cette affaire, c'est parce qu'elle est emblématique, elle est symbolique. Et nous voulons qu'à travers cette affaire, que la question de la détention arbitraire et des violations des droits de l'homme soit prise en compte et que plus jamais on ait des problèmes de cette nature.
So to this event, we're here gathered to talk about the question of arbitrary detention, but I would like to emphasize that Michel Joigny, who is a founding member of the working group, could not be here today, unfortunately, because of health issues. But it doesn't make this matter less important. This is a very important matter, and Michel Tangana's case is a symbol of arbitrary detention, and we need to gather, to work together to eradicate this question, this issue.
Ces précisions étant faites, je voudrais porter le premier point de mon intervention sur ce que c'est qu'un avis du groupe de travail et quelle est sa valeur juridique et sa portée.
So in my first point, I'm going to emphasize what is the judicial and legal value of the working group, of a working group opinion.
Le groupe de travail est la seule procédure spéciale des Nations Unies qui a des compétences quasi-juridictionnelles.
The working group is a UN body that has quasi-judicial competence.
Il fonctionne effectivement comme un tribunal avec une procédure qui respecte le principe du contradictoire avec des délais très précis et dispose des voies de recours qui sont bien réglementées.
So the working group function as a tribunal with the principle of the fair trial principle is respected and delays are precise for both the plaintiff and the respondent.
Il rend surtout de véritables décisions, même si pour des raisons diplomatiques, on les appelle maintenant des avis. Parce qu'avant, on les appelait des décisions, et les États ont protesté, et une résolution a été prise pour demander qu'on ne les appelle plus des décisions, mais des avis.
So at the beginning of the working group's decisions were called decisions, but because of complaints by states and because for diplomatic reasons, now they're not called decisions anymore, but opinions.
Sur cette valeur juridique de l'avis du groupe de travail, je peux invoquer beaucoup de dispositions du système des Nations Unies, mais j'ai relevé 4 dispositions qui vont vous donner un peu une idée de ce que représente un avis du groupe de travail.
So now he's going to introduce 4 resolutions from the United Nations to give an idea of within the UN how opinions are viewed, what are the legal value.
La première disposition, c'est la Charte des Nations Unies, qui dans son préambule dispose ce que je vais citer.
So the first document I'm going to cite is the United Nations Charter and its preamble.
Qui dit que les États proclament leur foi à créer les conditions nécessaires au maintien de la justice et du respect des obligations nées des traités et autres sources du droit international.
So the preamble provides that states that restate their faith in fundamental human rights, in the dignity and worth of the human person, in the equal rights of men and women and of large and small nations, to create the conditions necessary for the maintenance and justice and respect for the obligations arising from treaties and other sources of international law.
Et les avis du groupe de travail, comme je le dirai tout à l'heure, sont de véritables sources du droit international.
And the opinion of the working group, we shall see later, are real sources of international law.
Le deuxième principe que j'évoque, c'est toutes les résolutions de la Commission des droits de l'homme des Nations Unies et de l'actuel Conseil des droits de l'homme sur le groupe de travail.
All the resolution of the former commission on human rights of the United Nations and the current Council on human rights.
Toutes ces résolutions disent ceci: ils prient les gouvernements de tenir compte des avis du groupe de travail et, le cas échéant, de prendre les mesures appropriées pour corriger la situation des personnes privées arbitrairement de liberté et d'informer le groupe de travail des mesures qu'ils auront prises. Fin de citation.
So all the resolution adopted by the Human Rights Council, start of the quotation, pray governments to consider the opinion of the working group and, if necessary, to take appropriate measures to remedy the situation of persons arbitrarily deprived of liberty and to inform the working group of the decisions they have taken.
Il y a enfin, ou plutôt troisièmement, la résolution 5/2 du Conseil des droits de l'homme qui a été adoptée sans vote, qui dit ceci, je le cite: demande instamment à tous les États de coopérer avec les procédures spéciales et de les aider dans leur tâche, de fournir toutes les informations en temps voulu et de répondre sans retard excessif aux communications qu'elles leur transmettent.
Thirdly, there is the Council Resolution 5/2, adopted on June 18th, 2007, without a vote. And I quote, the resolution urges all states to cooperate with the special procedures and help them in their task to provide all information in times required and respond without undue delay to communication transmitted to them.
Enfin, le point 20 des méthodes de travail du groupe indique ceci, je le cite: les gouvernements informent le groupe de travail de la suite donnée à ces recommandations qu'il a formulées dans son avis.
Finally, in the paragraph 20 of the working group methods, it is said that governments inform the working group on the implementation of the recommendation made with its opinions.
Alors, toutes ces dispositions qui sont posées par le droit international, parmi tant d'autres, même écrites sous cette forme diplomatique, constituent dans leur formulation, sans aucune ambiguïté, une véritable obligation.
So even if this language is very diplomatic, there is no doubt under international law that they constitute obligations.
Et sur cette base seulement, les avis du groupe sont et doivent être considérés comme ayant une valeur juridique qui s'impose à tous.
And therefore, the opinions are and should be considered as having legal obligations.
Il s'y ajoute à ce raisonnement que plusieurs décisions de juridiction supranationale confirment ce principe, en donnent de belles illustrations et démontrent que ces avis sont en outre de véritables sources du droit international. Et je me permettrai de citer deux exemples.
And now I'm going to cite two examples about international or regional legal decisions that emphasize how important those opinions are.
La première, c'est la Cour européenne des droits de l'homme, qui, dans une décision concernant des officiers turcs, a fondé tout son arrêt sur la question de la recevabilité du recours, sur l'avis du groupe de travail, rendu en mai 2013.
So the first decision I would like to quote is from the European Court of Human Rights in a decision concerning Turkish military officers, and the court founded its judgment on the question of the admissibility of the appeal on the advice of the working group. I'm sorry, didn't.
So the court made its reasoning on admissibility relying on the value of the opinion issued by the working group.
Et la Cour a estimé en effet que le groupe de travail a été saisi, a déjà rendu un avis, et par conséquent, il ne pouvait être saisi à nouveau d'un recours fondé sur les mêmes faits et entre les mêmes parties.
So the court found that because the working group already issued an opinion, it could not rule again on the same facts because there was a precedent.
Et sur la base de ce raisonnement, la Cour européenne des droits de l'homme a déclaré le recours irrecevable.
And therefore, on this reasoning basis that the matter was already decided, the European Court decided not to rule on it.
Le deuxième exemple que je voulais donner, c'est la Chambre d'appel de la Cour pénale internationale, qui, dans un arrêt du 14 février 2014, concernant Saïf al-Islam Kadhafi et l'Égypte, a fondé également son raisonnement dans 5 de ses paragraphes sur l'avis que le groupe de travail a rendu dans la même affaire.
And the second example I would like to quote regarding the importance of the working group's opinions are the decision of the International Criminal Court Appeals Chamber of February 14th, 2014 on Saif al-Islam Gaddafi. And in 5 paragraphs of this ruling, it made reference to the working group opinion that was reached on the same facts and the same claims.
Les exemples sont nombreux, mais je voulais juste montrer que quand même les avis du groupe de travail sont une source importante aujourd'hui du droit international.
I could go on and quote a lot of different examples, but those two examples really emphasize the importance of the working group's opinion.
À cela s'ajoute un élément extrêmement important qui concerne les voies de recours qui sont autorisées contre les avis du groupe de travail.
Also, these examples really emphasize another important element on how to appeal the working group's findings and opinions.
Et la seule possibilité pour une personne, un gouvernement ou une ONG de former un recours contre un avis du groupe de travail est la procédure de révision prévue par le paragraphe 21 de ces méthodes de travail.
So the only way to appeal the working group's opinion would be through paragraph 21 of the working methods of the working group.
Dans ce paragraphe, les méthodes de travail nous disent, je ne cite pas tout le paragraphe, je cite seulement ce qui nous intéresse ici. Et le paragraphe dit ceci: dans des circonstances exceptionnelles, le groupe de travail peut, à la demande du gouvernement concerné, reconsidérer son avis dans les conditions suivantes.
And so now I'm quoting paragraph 21 on how to review a working group opinion. And it says that in exceptional circumstances only, the working group may, at the request of the government concerned, reconsider its opinion under the following conditions.
Parmi ces conditions, il y en a une seule que je vais citer. C'est celle qui est mentionnée au point C, qui dit ceci, je le cite: si la demande vient d'un gouvernement, ce dernier doit respecter les délais de réponse prévus au paragraphe 15 et 16.
And I'm only going to quote one condition, which is under paragraph C, that states that if the request comes from a government, the latter must respect the response period provided in paragraph 15 and 16.
Et il résulte de ce texte, de la manière la plus limpide, que la procédure de révision est la seule et l'unique voie qui permet de remettre en cause un avis du groupe de travail.
And it is clear from this text that the only way to appeal a working group opinion, I was going to say decision, is through this process and through the working group itself.
Dans le cas de M. Atangana, le Cameroun a choisi de ne pas répondre à la communication ni dans le délai qui lui était imparti, ni après.
In the case of Michel Atangana, the Cameroon chose not to answer to the working group, nor within the allotted delay or after.
Cette attitude qui est incompréhensible au regard de ce que je viens de dire, qui est incompréhensible, qui est inadmissible, qui est condamnable s'agissant d'un manquement à une obligation du droit international, est sanctionnée par le texte dont je viens de parler, dont la conséquence est de rendre l'avis du groupe contre Michel définitif, inattaquable et lui confère l'autorité de la chose jugée.
So because the Cameroon choose not to answer, which is not understandable and completely unacceptable under international standards, it led the working group to adopt its concluding opinion on Michel's case. And the opinion is definitive and unappealable because the government choose not to intervene.
C'est pas parce qu'aujourd'hui Michel Atangana a été libéré que la question Michel Atangana, le Cameroun, est une question qui est réglée. Au contraire, aujourd'hui, le Cameroun est redevable envers Michel Atangana et de manière irrévocable de la mise en œuvre intégrale de l'ensemble des recommandations qui sont contenues dans l'avis.
So let's not mistaken that it's not because Michel is out and freed that the issue is over. The government has to comply with this opinion in its entirety and should abide by any recommendations the working group made.
Les recommandations du groupe de travail dans cet avis contre le Cameroun sont au nombre de 3. La première, c'est la libération immédiate de Michel Atangana. La deuxième, c'est l'ouverture d'une enquête sur les faits et la sanction des personnes responsables de la privation de liberté de Atangana. Et la troisième, c'est le versement d'une indemnisation pour les préjudices au pluriel, causés par la privation de liberté depuis le 12 mai 1997 jusqu'à sa libération.
So the working group made 3 clear recommendations. One is the immediate release of Michel Atangana. Second is opening an investigation on the facts and how to hold those responsible accountable for the deprivation of liberty. And third is to pay compensation for damages, and I insist on the plural of damages, caused by the deprivation of liberty from May 12, 1997 until his release.
Il faut toujours avoir à l'esprit que ces recommandations constituent le fondement juridique et légal de toute notre démarche.
We have to keep in mind that the working group's recommendations are the basis of our actions.
À ce jour, seule la première recommandation a été mise en œuvre de manière insatisfaisante.
As of today, only the first recommendation, which is the release of Michel Atangana, was implemented, but in a very unsatisfactory manner.
La libération est intervenue en effet immédiatement après l'avis du groupe de travail, mais par un décret de commutation et de remise de peine qui ne fait aucune référence à l'avis ni au caractère arbitraire de la détention dont il a fait l'objet.
So the way the release happened, it happened right after the working group's opinion, but by a decree that, by the wording of the decree, it's just a remission of sentence. And it doesn't make any reference to the opinion and to the arbitrary nature of the detention.
De la même manière, l'attestation qui a été délivrée par le ministère des Affaires étrangères de la République française fait état d'une seule et unique mention que je cite, certifie que Michel Atangana a été détenu au Cameroun du 12 mai 1997 au 24 février 2014. Fin de citation. En l'absence également de toute référence à l'avis du groupe de travail, ni au caractère arbitraire de la détention.
Similarly, the communication that was made by the French Foreign Affairs Ministry barely refers to the working group's opinion, only says that Michel Atangana was held in Cameroon from May 1997 to February 2014, and just doesn't make any concrete reference to the recommendations of the working group.
Ces manquements doivent être réparés dans les plus brefs délais.
this should be repaired as soon as possible.
La deuxième recommandation est fondamentale. Elle a pour objet d'identifier tous ceux qui ont participé pendant plus d'une décennie en instrumentalisant les institutions politiques et judiciaires pour briser un homme dont la seule ambition était de venir construire le développement du Cameroun.
We have to keep in mind that the second recommendation, which is to open an investigation and hold those responsible accountable for what they did, is fundamental. The purpose of this recommendation is to identify all of those that were involved for over a decade in what happened, and just their exploitation of the political and judicial institutions for the sole purpose to break a man that wanted to bring development to Cameroon.
Cette recommandation est importante parce qu'il y a à son centre la question de l'impunité.
This recommendation is fundamental because it touches upon impunity.
La troisième et dernière recommandation est de très loin la plus importante. Elle concerne la réparation de tous les préjudices.
The third recommendation of the working group is by far the most important. It is on repairing all the damages.
Il y a le préjudice personnel, physique, moral, familial, financier et les autres résultant de l'ensemble des violations pendant 17 années. Il englobe aussi le traitement qui a été réservé à ces sociétés, ces investissements immobiliers et le revenu dont il est aujourd'hui encore privé par des procédures illégales et arbitraires.
So the reparation of damages include personal injuries, physical injuries, moral injuries, and the damages done to his family and also to his financial revenues that he's still deprived of as of today.
Le président Paul Biya doit mettre fin à cette situation qui est inacceptable et qui peut être comparée à un terrorisme d'État.
So the president of Cameroon has to really put effort into, I'm sorry, could you repeat?
To put an end to the violation, which could qualify as state terrorism.
Mais il y a surtout le préjudice financier qui est extrêmement important, dont est victime l'ensemble des compagnies internationales représentées par M. Atangana.
Also, there are financial damages that is affecting not only Michel Atangana's companies, but all international companies involved with his business.
Elles ont toutes été convaincues par lui dans le cadre d'un projet de réalisation d'un important réseau routier. Et lui, M. Atangana, a été nommé par le président Paul Biya à la tête du comité de pilotage qui s'occupait de ces axes routiers.
So all those companies were convinced through Michel to invest in a big project for road infrastructures, and Michel was at the head of this project.
Et sur ce point, un document officiel établi par la présidence de la République du Cameroun, qui est curieusement intitulé Enjeux financiers cachés de l'affaire Atangana, a évalué le préjudice à la somme de 278 milliards de francs CFA, qui est l'équivalent de la moitié d'un budget d'un pays en Afrique.
So on this point, an official document was issued by the presidency of the Republic of Cameroon on December 27, 2012, and this document is entitled The Hidden Financial Issues of the Case of Michel Atangana. And in this document, the damages are estimated to 275 billion, which is approximately half of the GDP of an African state.
ce braquage économique d'État qui est particulièrement grave est de nature à décourager le transfert de technologies et les investisseurs en Afrique, qui en a besoin pour son développement économique et social et pour sa stabilité.
So this organized state robbery has only one goal, is to discourage the transfer of technology and investment in Africa.
Si nous voulons obtenir des taux de croissance en Afrique pour aller vers l'émergence et créer des emplois, pour éviter entre autres ce drame de l'immigration qui est d'actualité, nous devons sécuriser impérativement les investissements par un état de droit crédible qui respecte les droits de l'homme, la bonne gouvernance et la transparence.
So if we want the investment to be sustainable in Africa and to cope with immigration, we absolutely need to secure the rule of law, the respect of human rights, good governance, accountability, and transparency.
Je vais conclure par un appel, parce que si, en l'état actuel du droit international, il n'existe pas de procédure forcée contre les États, mais devant l'ampleur et la gravité de cette situation, il appartient à la communauté internationale, dans toutes ses composantes, d'apporter son concours à la résolution de ce douloureux problème.
So I'm going to conclude with an appeal to the international community, because even if under international law we've reached some ceilings, we still need to group together for the international community to work together and succeed.
La conférence de ce matin participe de cette mouvance et je voudrais remercier tous les partenaires qui l'accompagnent, en particulier Freedom House, la Fondation Kennedy, mais aussi le département d'État américain.
So I would like to thank everybody who attend, especially Freedom House, Robert F. Kennedy's Human Rights, and the State Department.
L'appel s'adresse à toutes les ONG de toutes les natures, parce que c'est une question qui est transversale. Il ne s'agit pas seulement de finances humanitaires, mais il s'agit du développement économique et social.
So my appeal is addressed to everybody because it's not a linear issue, it's an issue that concerns everybody and we have to work together.
Enfin, et c'est extrêmement important, Michel Atangana est un citoyen français et il doit aussi et surtout être soutenu et accompagné par son pays, la France, dans la recherche de solutions concertées au nom de l'exercice de la protection diplomatique.
And also of the utmost importance, let's highlight that Michel Tanguera is a French citizen and has to be supported and accompanied by his country, France, in the search of common solutions on behalf of the exercise of diplomatic protection.
Je vous remercie de votre attention. J'ai fait juste quelques extraits de mon texte qui va être disponible et qui pourra être distribué à ceux qui sont intéressés. Je vous remercie.
I thank you for your attention, and I have a more complete speech that is available to anyone who wants to read it.
Perfect. Malik, thank you so much. And Chloe, thank you for doing a wonderful job translating for everyone. And turn it over to Jared.
All right. Well, thank you everyone for being here. It's an honor to be with so many friends and colleagues. I want to thank Robert F. Kennedy Human Rights, Freedom House, and the other sponsors of the event. It's a particular honor to be here with Michelle, of course, and also with the former chairman of the working group on arbitrary detention and the current representative of the Africa group. Given that I myself have taken about 40 cases to the working group on arbitrary detention in the last 15 years, many of which have been decided upon by both Malik in the past and Roland in the present. So it's a particular pleasure to be here talking about the impact of an opinion of the working group on arbitrary detention on one human life, and also what we can learn from those kinds of decisions, opinions, going forward. A lot of ground has been covered, so I'm going to talk briefly about background for Michel's work in Cameroon, which hasn't really been touched on all that much. I'm going to talk a little bit about his wrongful imprisonment and quote from one or two places in the opinion itself so you can get a sense of what it actually said. And then I'll talk about where things stand today in terms of achieving justice and accountability for Michel and a vindication of his rights. I, of course, serve as international counsel to Michel, working on his behalf. So this whole situation that led to Michel's imprisonment came from a group of companies, about 8 Cameroonian international companies, 30 years ago having contracts with the government of Cameroon for a range of different infrastructure projects. And what happened was, in essence, that the government had a major financial crisis, ran short of money to pay these companies, and defaulted on their contracts. And Michel at the time was working for one of these companies and was tasked with the difficult challenge of working out a payment mechanism with the government to make the companies whole. And ultimately, he negotiated a solution that created Copisur, a public-private partnership that would be a way for these companies to return to Cameroon and continue to invest. Meanwhile, their taxes that they would owe ordinarily on profits would be forgiven in advance and would be reduced from the amount of debt that they owed. At the time, in the mid-1990s, when this was all worked out, the outstanding debt owed to those 8 companies was approximately 100 million US dollars. And by 1997, Copisur had developed plans for a major infrastructure project, but instead of proceeding with it, the government appropriated those plans for itself and arrested Michel on May 12, 1997 for alleged embezzling of public funds, despite the fact that he never had any access to the funds, any government funds of any kind. And it also seized the remaining assets of Copisur and those 8 companies on the ground in the country. And then from there, the government proceeded to undertake the same plans that had been put forward by Copisur, deliver half as much on the road project that was expected in the first place, and a number of people involved are believed to have pocketed the difference, charging the government the full price for the project, and walking away with tens of millions of dollars. In a trial marred by extraordinary procedural irregularities, he was summarily convicted and sentenced to 15 years imprisonment. And belying the corruption endemic in his case, he was also held in solitary confinement incommunicado in a basement cell of the Ministry of Defense, which is both extraordinary and offends any sense of justice and accountability. More than 11 years later, his conviction was reversed and the charges were dismissed, but the dismissal was set aside and he was retried on the same set of offenses, reconvicted, and then given a sentence of 20 years in prison. In mid-2013, his case was brought to the UN Working Group on Arbitrary Detention, and in a decision adopted on November 13th, 2013, and made public in January 2014, the working group found his detention was illegal and in flagrant violation of international law. And it determined that his case fell within categories 1, 2, and 3 of the working group's ordinary procedures. Category 1, no basis for detention. Category 2, violation of his fundamental human rights, freedom of opinion and expression, political participation. And Category 3, a range of due process abuses in the case. Let me just read you a quote or two from the opinion, because it shows how strongly the working group under Malik's leadership felt about the facts of this case. This is from the working group decision opinion. Quote, "It is clear that none of the judicial bodies involved in Mr. Atangana's very long period of deprivation of liberty were impartial, as evidenced by a great many facts. Mr. Atangana was convicted without the benefit of the services of his defense lawyers. His lawyers were not notified of the hearing dates, which reportedly did not leave them the time necessary to prepare and argue an adequate case for the defense. And Mr. Atangana's right to be released pending the trial was flouted on the pretext of securing his appearance and ensuring that he served his sentence, as was his right to be tried promptly and to enjoy the presumption of innocence." He went on to say, of course, that the principle of ne bis in idem was breached. In other words, he was tried twice for the same acts. And the working group urged, as we've discussed here already, the government to immediately release him, recommend that it investigate and hold accountable those responsible, and that he be compensated for his wrongful imprisonment. He was released February 24th, 2014 under a presidential decree that released a range of prisoners, but that was really designed for him. And he was not pardoned, and his initial conviction has not yet been vacated. To add insult to injury, the government of France, which had in essence denied that he was even a French national through this entire time that he was in prison, issued this attestation, which is a piece of paper to explain to people in France from the foreign ministry why he had no tax record and why he had disappeared, in essence, from all the public systems in France. And that attestation merely recounted that he had been detained from the date he was arrested to the date he was released, a period of roughly 17 years, making no description whatsoever that the UN had found his detention to be arbitrary. And this has had ongoing consequences for him, because in France, one cannot receive a sentence of that length without having committed a murder. There is no such sentence of this length for so-called economic crimes. But more importantly, as you can imagine, when the official French government position is that he was merely detained without any explanation as to why or that it was illegal, under international law, it also means that it's very difficult to get a bank account, to apply for a job, or to otherwise re-engage with society, because there is no independent explanation as to what happened to him. And that is the official position of the government of France, something that we're looking, obviously, to remedy. So where do you stand, where do things stand today? The debt that's owed, by the way, to these companies that was $100 million back in the mid-1990s is today worth more than $500 million. And this is what was being alluded to before in terms of the billions of dollars of French CFA that were owed. And the government has yet to do anything to repay that debt. That's obviously one set of issues that we are exploring rather intensively, and it's something that needs to be remedied as a general proposition. The government has obligations to follow through on the remaining 2 recommendations, to investigate those responsible and to hold them to account and to compensate him for the wrongful imprisonment for 17 years. Obviously, nothing is going to make up for the time that he has spent in prison or for what has happened to him and the injustices and the violations of his fundamental rights over that length of time. I think no one here can imagine how terrible that has been for him. But we can try to achieve the best measure of justice possible, which is a full implementation of the working group decisions. So what can we learn from Michel's case? I think one of the most important things to learn is the resilience and the power of the human spirit. We see Michel sitting before us, having survived what is something that I don't think any of us could begin to imagine, an extraordinary ideal. And he persevered in the face of immense adversity and has emerged with both a lack of bitterness, but also a deep commitment to help others who are arbitrarily detained in Cameroon especially, but also all over the world. And I think that it's the power of a victim like him to stand up for other victims and to speak about his experience, to demand justice and accountability, and to urge that the blight of arbitrary detention be ended in Cameroon and around the world. That will speak volumes and speak in extraordinary ways to the world about the importance of addressing these kinds of issues. Roland alluded to the fact that not a lot of people know about the working group on arbitrary detention. And this is a major problem, and combined with that problem is the lack of resources that the working group itself has in terms of its staff functions. Malik and Roland serve as volunteers appointed by the prior commission, maybe by the Human Rights Council, but they're not paid for their work, and there are 2.5 staff roughly these days at the working group on arbitrary detention to hear not only all the complaints coming in from around the world and to process them and to facilitate the working group meeting 3 times a year to issue individual opinions after governments have been given an opportunity to respond, but also to conduct numerous missions visiting different countries around the world to look at detention practices and engage in a range of other outreach. And so to my mind, I think it's very, very important that the working group have the resources that it needs. The second lesson that I would point to is the challenge of closing the gap between the commitments of governments to international human rights treaties and their implementation in practice. Oftentimes, quite sadly, opinions of the working group on arbitrary detention are the proverbial tree falling in the forest with no one around to hear them. I think oftentimes advocates for petitioners don't realize that while the working group opinion is very strong and solid, that it isn't enough to just receive it because it's just handed to the petitioner. You need to stand up in a public fora, and tell the world what has happened. The working group issues some, these opinions themselves in batches every few months, but ultimately, victims, their families, and advocates have to apply political and public relations pressure on governments to close the gap between the commitments and the violations of those commitments, and to obtain the actual release of those people wrongly detained. And the working group is trying to improve its follow-up on these individual opinions. But right now, because of a lack of resources, as far as I know, it's still not possible for the working group to tell you on every individual case what actually happened and what the timing was of the release of individual people from prison, and whether it had anything to do with or not the opinions of the working group on arbitrary detention. The last point that I'll note is the importance of international institutions like the working group to save lives. It's extraordinary that Michel survived after what he went through. And while some people make habit of criticizing the United Nations and saying how ineffective it is or how it's failing in a whole host of ways, which may well be true, at the same time, no institution is monolithic. There are good parts and bad parts. There are effective parts and less effective parts. And I think that one of the gems in the human rights machinery of the United Nations is the UN Special Procedures, of which the working group is only one of more than 50 different country individual rapporteurs and working groups. But among those, the working group on arbitrary detention is the only one that actually issues individual adjudicated written opinions making a determination that a person's violations of their rights is in fact illegal and against the country's commitments, legal commitments that it has made. And in that sense, it makes it one of the most powerful of the special procedures in terms of its potential impact. I would say that Michel Atagana, just to conclude, very much embodies the quote that we see on the wall up against the back here. Each time, from Robert Kennedy, of course, each time a man stands up for an ideal or acts to improve the lot of others or strikes out against injustice, he sends forth a tiny ripple of hope. Crossing each other from a million different centers of energy and daring, those ripples build a current which can sweep down the mightiest walls of oppression and resistance. Michel, you're an inspiration to all of us for what you have survived, but as importantly, what you are doing now that you are out. And it's an honor to represent you and to work with you. And we obviously look forward to hearing your remarks here and talking about how your work can help so many other people who have been left behind in Cameroon and in so many other places around the world without hope and without assistance to secure their release from arbitrary detention. Thanks.
Great, thank you, Jared. I think all of your presentations have melded really well and given us a very clear picture and have added some texture to this clear, unequivocal travesty of justice that Michel had to endure. But also, as Jared mentioned, the triumph of the human spirit, which I think speaks to all of us. And while Michel usually likes to let others, tell this story, and he's a very humble man, we've been able to convince him to say a few words. So, without further ado, please, Michel, the stage is yours.
Merci infiniment. Je veux d'abord saluer tous ceux qui sont ici dans cette salle. Et avant tout, je veux garder une dimension humaine de cette rencontre.
So thank you very much to all of you for coming and welcome. And I want to keep it very simple. It's about a meeting.
Alors, je veux faire un geste qui n'est pas très occidental, mais qui exprime ce que je pense au fond de moi. Donc, je vais vous procéder en touchant Geoffrey, parce que je voulais par là dire l'impact de ce que peuvent faire les défenseurs des droits de l'homme.
So I'm going to proceed in a not very Western way by touching Jeffrey and thanking him for for all his work, and he's really showing how much human rights defenders can do.
Et ce geste-là me permet de vous dire de continuer à défendre la vie humaine.
So through this gesture, I'm thanking you for defending the human life.
Parce que quand Jeffrey écrit au gouvernement camerounais, étant en Freedom House, aujourd'hui, vous ne pouvez pas réaliser l'impact de cette lettre-là qui m'est arrivée, enfin, que j'ai eu connaissance par la violence, la réaction du gouvernement camerounais.
So when Jeffrey was at Freedom House, he wrote this letter to the Cameroon government, and you cannot imagine the impact it had.
Et cette lettre-là envoyée m'a évité d'être tué, je dirais, dans la cellule où j'étais enfermé pendant 17 ans.
This letter saved my life. It literally impeded me from being killed and die in this solitary confinement.
Et je voulais dire merci à Jeffrey aujourd'hui, puisque là, étant aujourd'hui à la Fondation Kennedy, le courage qu'il a continué de défendre mon dossier, mon cas, me donne aussi envie de continuer à parler, parce que je ne veux pas négliger l'importance du travail qui a été effectué.
So thank you, Jeffrey, and thank you for courage and how dedicated you were to my case. And it really gives me the little push to keep going.
Et je veux dire merci à M. Malik Sow, qui est, vous savez bien, vous le voyez, l'Africain. Et j'ai été surpris de voir que les Africains respectent aussi, quand ils ont réussi dans leur vie, les droits de l'homme.
And thank you to Malik, Mr. African. And I was really happy to see that even when the African man succeeds, it still cares about his continent.
J'avais le sentiment, étant humilié, méprisé, détruit en profondeur, que l'homme africain n'avait qu'un seul objectif, détruire la vie dans sa racine.
So because of what happened to me, because of the humiliation and how I was profoundly destroyed, I was under the impression that in Africa, men do not have compassion.
Je ne peux pas vous décrire les conditions dans lesquelles j'ai été retenu pendant 17 ans. Je peux faire garder l'impression positive de cette réunion de famille.
So I'm not going to go into details on the conditions of my imprisonment. I would like to keep the spirit up and the good atmosphere of this family reunion.
Ce que je peux seulement dire du fond du cœur, c'est qu'on ne peut pas faire ça à un être humain.
The only thing I would really like to know to say from the bottom of my heart is that you should not and you cannot do that to another human being.
Et si je me tais, c'est aussi donner le quitus. Je ne sais pas si ce mot-là. Si je me tais, c'est donner le quitus. Si je me tais, c'est donner le quitus à d'autres gouvernements, à d'autres États de faire les mêmes choses. C'est pourquoi je dois parler aujourd'hui. Et je vous remercie de me laisser le soin de parler, tant que cela m'est possible jusqu'à la fin de ma vie, pour dire non à cela.
And so if I stay quiet, it will just allow government to just keep abusing people and keep doing what they did to me. So I'm not going to stay quiet, and I'm going to still speak out until the rest of my life.
Et c'est pourquoi je dois respecter le travail des ONG. Moi, je suis financier de métier. J'ai découvert l'importance des ONG dans ma cellule.
So I'm a financial businessman, but while I was imprisoned, I discovered the importance of NGOs.
Et je vous prie de continuer avec le même courage, parce que l'homme, la vie humaine, a besoin de vous.
So please continue doing the work you're doing, because human beings and human life need you.
Et enfin, l'attitude de Malik Sow en tant que président du groupe a contaminé positivement Roland Adjouvi. Et c'est pourquoi aujourd'hui, il est là aujourd'hui pour donner sens au combat que je mène.
And so what Malik did positively contaminated Laurent, and now he's continuing the work that he's doing through the working group.
Donc voilà, mesdames et messieurs, ce que je voulais dire pour vous remercier du fond du cœur et remercier la Fondation Kennedy, Madame Kerry Kennedy qui n'est pas là ce matin, que j'avais vue à Paris, au Sénat, dans cette pièce qui veut dire parlez vrai au pouvoir. Hein? Parlez-vous au pouvoir parce que je voudrais que mon langage soit vrai et vrai à tous les pouvoirs.
So I would once again want to thank everybody for coming, and especially Robert F. Kennedy Human Rights and Mrs. Kerry Kennedy that is not here today, but that I have met previously in the Senate in France while the Speak Truth to Power play happened at the French Senate.
Non, mesdames et messieurs, je suis vivant et je suis très heureux d'être vivant. Vous devez vous en douter.
So, ladies and gentlemen, I'm alive and I'm so wonderfully happy to be alive.
Et donc c'est pourquoi je demande à mon avocat, Maître Jarret, de tout faire pour maintenir ma vie parce que je ne voudrais pas déprimer à cause de la négligence que les États voudraient faire des recommandations des Nations Unies. Je ne voudrais pas que ce travail passe inaperçu. Et je veux me battre pour que ce travail soit respecté.
So, thank you, Jared, for representing me and for all the work you do to make my life the way it is and not letting me be depressed in view of what the governments are doing of UN resolutions and the opinions of the working group.
Les compagnies qui veulent investir pour l'Afrique, je reprends les propos de Malik Sow tout à l'heure, il faut créer des emplois en Afrique. L'Afrique est reconnue aujourd'hui comme le futur démographique du monde entier.
So now I'm going to talk about companies in Africa and echo what Malik said about the importance to create jobs in Africa, because Africa is seen as the demographic future of our world.
Et il ne faut pas que le poumon démographique du monde devienne le cimetière des vies humaines.
And please let not let not become the demographic lung of our world to become the cemetery of human life.
Donc, j'envoie aussi un message aux investisseurs pour dire qu'avec les diplomates, et je veux saluer le travail du département américain, avec M. Robert P. Jackson, que vous ne connaissez pas.
So I would like to send a message to the investment community, and especially to the U.S. Department of State, and especially Mr. Robert Jackson. He's not here, and you might not know.
Il était ambassadeur aux États-Unis au Cameroun, et dans la diplomatie, il est reconnu que le Cameroun n'est pas dans la zone d'influence américaine. C'est ce qui se dit.
So Robert Jackson was the U.S. ambassador to Cameroon, and in the diplomatic world, Cameroon is not really in the U.S. sphere of influence, which means.
Et c'est M. Robert P. Jackson qui a appelé la France, mon pays, à venir à mon secours.
But Robert Jackson was the one to call upon France to come to my rescue.
Donc, je dois ma vie d'abord à cette force intérieure de M. Robert P. Jackson.
So I also thank Mr. Jackson for saving my life and for his personal courage.
Et c'est pourquoi j'appelle de tout mon cœur le respect de la légalité.
And so from the bottom of my heart, I call for the respect of the law.
Que cet respect de la légalité soit la force de travail des États, tous les États, y compris la France, mon pays.
And for the law to be the basis of all work we do, including France.
Parce que pendant 14 ans, j'ai été oublié par mon pays, la France.
Because for 14 years, I was forgotten by my country.
Et ce silence a failli nous coûter la vie.
And this silence almost cost my life.
Si la France avait réagi dès 1987, je n'aurais pas mis 1 an en prison.
If France had reacted in 1997, I would not even have stayed a year in prison.
Et l'attestation dont a parlé M. Malixou et mon avocat Jarret tout à l'heure est une attestation insultante au combat que j'ai mené pendant 17 ans pour ne pas mourir.
And the mere piece of paper that we talked about earlier is an insult to the work, to my life and to the work I've been trying to do.
Et ne pas respecter les engagements souscrits par le Cameroun en invitant les sociétés à investir, en accumulant des dettes, c'est aussi une insulte à ceux qui font confiance au commerce libre, au libre-échange dans le monde entier.
And not respecting the investment done in Cameroon is also an insult to everyone who is investing around the world.
Donc je finis par là, puisque le temps est court. Je voulais seulement demander aux journalistes, aux ONG, parce que les États africains comptent sur votre silence. Ils pensent que quand on est libéré, il faut oublier tout le reste. C'est pourquoi je demande et je m'associe totalement au respect total des recommandations des Nations Unies. C'est, comme a dit M. Malixou, le fondement juridique de mon combat.
So I'm calling upon journalists and NGOs to not stay quiet because African countries are counting on the silence of people. Once they're free, they do not want you to speak. So I call on the respect of the United Nations recommendations.
Comme l'actualité est mouvante, il y a des cas collectifs, mais je pense aussi que les cas individuels, bien défendus, permettent de résoudre et de prévenir la violence.
Of course, there are collective cases, but I strongly believe that individual cases, once they're well argued, can set a precedent and help the cause.
C'est pourquoi je voulais vous présenter ce journal, qui est le Canard enchaîné. C'est un journal militant français qui date du 22 février. Avril. Et ce journal, à la page 2, vous aurez ceux qui peuvent le lire, il sera disponible. Les parlementaires français font une enquête pour dire non au refus de la France d'établir en Afrique des relations claires. Et à la page 4, ce journal définit que de tous les ressortissants abandonnés par la France à l'étranger, je suis le cas le plus douloureux. Le doyen les abandonnés. Donc ce journal vous permet de comprendre l'ampleur de ma souffrance. Et c'est pourquoi je vous demande de ne pas laisser mourir cette souffrance, parce que si elle est résolue convenablement, plus personne ne connaîtra ce que j'ai connu.
So now I'm presenting a French newspaper, which is a militating newspaper. It's called Enchained Duck from April 22nd, and in which it's going to be available for those of you who can read it. And there are several pieces, articles where it says that French parliamentaries are investigating relations between France and Africa, and those diplomatic relations that are unclear. And also in another article, they're talking about my specific case and how important my case is to all of the African immigrants that are forgotten. I am the most important.
Et pour terminer donc, j'ai gardé le courage pendant 17 ans et j'entends le garder intact tout au long de ma vie, je ne reculerai jamais.
And so to conclude, I was courageous during 17 years and I'm not going to stop.
So we've run a little bit over, so we understand that people have to take up, but I think we can take a round of questions. We have time for that. And just to say, every time I meet Michel and we talk, I think he's already reached the limit of the kind things he can say, and I just want to say he exceeded that once again. And I think it's so inspiring that even though this man was behind bars for 17 years. He's already thinking beyond that and bigger than that. He's thinking about not just himself, but the many like him around the world who are arbitrarily detained and deprived of their fundamental rights and liberty. So thank you again so much, Michel. It's great to have you here. So like I said, we have a few minutes for questions. I think we might just take a round and go around the room and take maybe 3 or 4 questions. And just introduce yourself and your organization. That would be fantastic for everyone.
I'm Chloe Schwenke from the McCourt School of Public Policy at Georgetown. I would like to ask Michelle 2 points, if I could. There are areas that were not covered specifically, and that's the role of the French media in securing his release. I saw a very moving video of your son and your sisters. That was really powerful. And also the role of civil society in Cameroon, whether they did anything at all to support you.
Seigneur André, le rôle des médias français. Oui. Bien. Sur le premier point, le rôle des médias français a été inefficace.
So first, the French media was not efficient.
Inefficace pendant 12 à 13 longues années de silence.
Because he stayed silent for at least 12, 13 years.
Les médias français travaillent essentiellement en se référant au ministère des Affaires étrangères. C'est là qu'ils prennent leurs informations.
So the French media on international issues get their information from the French Ministry of Foreign Affairs.
Et si le ministère des Affaires étrangères a décidé de taire un dossier, vous comprenez que là, on ne peut pas avoir une présence médiatique importante.
So therefore, if the French Foreign Ministry has decided that your file should stay silent, then there's not a lot of information you can get.
Et aujourd'hui, mon cas est connu en Afrique.
And today my case is known in Africa.
Parce qu'un média français qui s'appelle RFI, Radio France Internationale, et France 24 ont beaucoup travaillé sur mon dossier. Et là, je rejoins votre deuxième question. Grâce aux appels d'urgence de la société civile camerounaise.
There are 2 French media, RFI, which is French Radio International, and France 24, have intensively worked on my case in Africa. And now I'm bridging towards your second question. They worked on my case due to the influence of the civil society.
Bien. Et aucune structure française d'importance comme ONG n'a défendu mon cas.
And no major NGOs in France has worked on my case, provided support.
Et donc aujourd'hui, et c'est pourquoi je répète et j'articule bien en disant que si je suis vivant, j'ai cité Freedom House, j'ai cité Amnesty International, qui n'est pas français, et si je me donne un peu de temps, j'explique un peu comment ça s'est passé avec Amnesty International.
So right now, today, Family Life, it's mainly thanks to Freedom House and Amnesty International, and those are not French NGOs. If I have time, I can explain the role of Amnesty International.
Le gouvernement autorise, dans un accord avec Amnesty, la visite des prisons au Cameroun.
So through Amnesty International is authorized in Cameroon to visit some prison through an agreement.
Et la société civile dit à Amnesty que vous ne pouvez pas faire un rapport sur le Cameroun sans voir à Tangana.
And so the civil society in Cameroon has said that you cannot make a report on the prison conditions in Cameroon without visiting Michel Tangana.
Et pendant 6 mois, le Cameroun refuse cette rencontre, mais finalement elle est autorisée.
And for 6 months, Cameroon refused Amnesty International to visit him, but finally it happened.
Et il me dit, Godefroy, qui était l'Amnesty, me dit, le Cameroun attend que je fasse un rapport positif sur les prisons au Cameroun. Après ce que j'ai vu ici, je veux dire la vérité.
And so Godefroy, that was part of Amnesty International, told him that the Cameroon government is expecting me to do a positive report on the prison condition, but after what I'm seeing now, there's no way I'm gonna do that.
Et il a fait la photo de ma cellule, qui est devenue une photo mondiale aujourd'hui, pour montrer les conditions dans lesquelles j'étais enchaîné dans un sous-sol.
And so therefore he took a picture of the cell I was, a picture that has gone around the world now, where you can see the size of my cell and the conditions and how I was enchained.
Et ce travail a permis à Freedom House d'assister aux audiences, et pendant 3 ans, avec John March qui venait aux audiences tous les jours, et ce travail-là m'a permis de rester vivant pendant ces longues années. Voilà, merci infiniment.
And so through Amnesty's work, Freedom House could take on the case and attend the court proceedings. And every day John March was in the court, and that's how my case grew.
Yeah.
Hi, I'm Pierre Toncho with National Endowment for Democracy. First of all, I want to thank you, Michelle, and everyone that spoke. That was pretty powerful. The National Endowment for Democracy, I don't know who's familiar with us. We're a grant-making organization. We give grants to local civil society organizations. And I had a question for Roland and Mr. So, especially about a working group. I don't know if there's been any thoughts of working with civil society in those countries. I'm glad you touched up on the civil society point, because some of the problems that you highlighted in terms of resources or bridging the gap, the civil society, the local civil society could help in that, in terms of broadcasting or advocating for the opinions from the working group. And for example, in Cameroon, we have 9 projects, 3 are pending. And in one of them, one of our partners is actually working to evaluate the government. The government has come up with a set of recommendations on how it's going to fix its judiciary. So it's working to evaluate, and it's come up with an evaluation report lately. For example, that's kind of, you guys could collaborate on things of that nature and broadcast it, even the UN and whatnot. But I'm wondering, what kind of relationship do you have with civil society in those countries?
The civil society right now are feeding us with information. Usually the cases are brought by civil society organization. Very few lawyers have developed an expertise in working with the working group. But we have no process of continuing any work with them once we get the case. During the last session, which ends on Thursday, we adopt a new rule to appoint a vice chair for follow-up. It means that person will follow up with the civil society who brought the case to us to check on what's happened in enforcing our opinions. So it's now that we are trying to design our own mechanism to follow up. So what you are saying is fully part of what we envisage. So if you are interested, I could work with you, because I'm the vice chair on the follow-up procedure.
Non, ça c'est bon, on va parler. On va parler.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Maria Steffen. I'm with U.S. Institute of Peace and the Atlantic Council. And first of all, thank you, Michelle and colleagues and Jeff, for your remarks today. Very happy that you are free, Michelle, and that you are alive and with us. My question is a little bit related to the civil society one, but I guess I'm wondering, given the closed space for civil society, or the closing space for civil society in Cameroon, what is the state of activism there? And so you have traditional NGOs and traditional civil society doing good work, but what are activists and other civil society groups, workers, women's groups, artists, musicians, are they able to mobilize currently in Cameroon? And around which issues are they mobilizing, and how effective are they? Thanks.
And you have a follow-on.
Oui.
It's related.
Yes, so Aniedi Okure from Africa Faith and Justice Network. I actually had the same question, so I want to add also to it, is that, you know, we hear over and over the let me use the word, the corruption within the judiciary, you know, in Cameroon. I mean, we've come across it ourselves when we were trying to, the African Faith and Justice Network was trying to get after a land grabber, you know, in southwestern Cameroon. And we kept hearing that what we were doing, even we are trying to set things right at the judiciary, somebody is buying up the judge, the lawyer is being bought up, and vice versa, and that we were going nowhere, and we came across that. So the question now is, you know, what the young lady just asked, what is really happening that this is going on, people are suffering, and things don't seem to change? That's number one. On top of that, too, in terms of activism, civil society, why is it, given the surrounding country, Nigeria to the left of Cameroon, depending on which direction you face, you know, you have changes in democracy and all of that, and it seems since independence, this is the second president that Cameroon has had. What is it that is enabling that to happen? So I'm just, you know, to the three of you, or whoever is your answer.
Je veux, Roland aura des choses à dire, mais je vais attirer l'attention pour être honnête avec vous. Freedom House a fait des efforts avec les impôts américains pour former la société civile. Mais c'est un combat très très difficile. Vous avez donné référence tout à l'heure où vous disiez qu'il y avait 2 présidents au Cameroun depuis l'indépendance. Et la conscience au Cameroun, la conscience générale est éteinte.
So I would like to say, for example, that Freedom House has invested a lot of money to build the civil society in Cameroon, but it has been very difficult. And there's a lack of consciousness in Cameroon, so there's not a lot of chance that the civil society is going to win it.
Pour effacer les 50 dernières années de post-indépendance, il faudra beaucoup de temps.
And so to erase the last 50 years of post-independence with only 2 presidents, it's going to need a lot of time.
Tous les intellectuels camerounais partent à l'étranger.
So, for example, all of the intellectuals of Cameroon are just emigrating somewhere else.
Premier point. Tous les intellectuels camerounais, si vous regardez aujourd'hui dans les organisations internationales, il n'y a quasiment pas de Camerounais présents.
And so, in a lot of international organizations, Cameroonese intellectuals are not present.
En dehors de la CAF, pour le football.
Outside of football organizations.
Et si vous regardez aussi à la CAF, celui qui est là-bas, il a depuis 20 ans, il a créé le même système d'inamovibilité.
And even at the football organization, the Cameroonese person that is there has been there for 20 years and has created this system of corruption and not being able to replace him.
Dans la question que vous m'avez posée, madame, respectueusement, je pense qu'aujourd'hui, les animateurs qui sont courageux, qui veulent défendre l'aspect civil, sont en danger de mort constant.
So in Cameroon, the civil society and those few individuals that want to change things are in great dangers and life-threatening situations at all times.
Parce que le pouvoir politique a une telle influence dans la concentration des pouvoirs qu'il n'y a pas de possibilité pour un homme, une femme, défendeur des droits de l'homme, d'être défendu par la justice. Et même, j'ajoute, Jared me pardonnera, j'ajoute que certains avocats deviennent des procureurs. en lieu et place des procureurs eux-mêmes.
And so because of such a concentration of power, it's very unlikely that a man or a woman that want to be a human rights activist is going to be protected by the judiciary. And with no offense to Jared, also a lot of lawyers turn themselves into prosecutors, and the whole judicial system is intertwined.
Je précise ce point-là parce que les avocats travaillent en complicité avec le procureur. Et parfois, il devient même plus dangereux pour leurs clients que le procureur lui-même.
And a lot of time, lawyers work together with the courts, and sometimes it's even more dangerous for clients to have a lawyer because they're in bed together.
Et pour terminer avec ma réponse, l'accusation formulée par le procureur est la décision du tribunal.
And so, to conclude on this point, the
the allegation of the
Prosecutor.
prosecutor usually is the final judgment, because the judge will just rub stamp what the prosecutor say and you move on.
J'explique bien en disant que ce que dit le procureur est l'avis du tribunal. Et c'est pourquoi au Cameroun, vous avez suivi l'actualité, tous les défendeurs des droits des homosexuels ont dû quitter le Cameroun.
And so, for example, in Cameroon, all the LGBT rights, human rights defenders have to flee Cameroon because it wasn't safe for them.
Et ils sont persécutés, ils sont interdits des médias, même privés par moments, et ils sont en danger de mort.
So they're in life-threatening situation at all times and persecuted.
Let me just add on one point. The NGO that I founded, Freedom Now, that works to free prisoners of conscience around the world, it's been our experience that there are obviously no simple solutions of any kind to addressing systems like the one in Cameroon with President Biya in charge and endemic corruption in the judiciary. But when it comes to endemic problems and the way that these countries approach things, the best thing one can do, as Louis Brandeis said, sunlight is the best disinfectant, is to point a bright light at what's going on, and to talk about representative cases as indicative of broader abuses in the country, in the same way that Roland was talking about the number of cases in Cameroon. So our model is to take up, we have about 30 plus prisoners of conscience in prison around the world in different countries, and is to take up the toughest cases and to use that as an opportunity to not only advocate for those people to be released on behalf of their families and them personally, but then also to shine a bright light on the broader set of issues that their detention raises. Because it's been our experience that if you can help the most persecuted people in the country, people who are political prisoners, prisoners of conscience, then there's a ripple effect down in terms of emboldening civil society to be able to speak out more and otherwise. Obviously, there are no easy answers here, but one small thing that one can look at is taking a case like Michelle's, which is why I'm so happy to be involved in assisting him, and to use it to shine a bright light on what's happening in Cameroon in exactly the way that we're doing today, and that can be very, very powerful and effective. And at the end of the day, there's tons of corruption and terrible things happening. Nobody's proud of it. Nobody is happy to stand up and say, I'm doing it. Everybody denies that it happens. So when you shine a bright light on it, people go scurrying away and pretend like they had nothing to do with it, and these are the kinds of situations that one can actually resolve.
And I want to add also that activism does exist on the ground, but activism has to stay away of the political arena. Because if they get involved in anything political, it's problematic, it's life-threatening. Also, there is a level of cultural and brainwash as to the system, which make it normal for everyone. Malik is older than me, and he can assert it. When you reach a level in our African society, people expect you to get into the government so that they can benefit. Not that you are going to change the government, the country, but they will say, oh, you are my brother, you are my related TK. If you get into it, I will get the benefit. And they don't see anything wrong in it. And that's something deep in most of the sub-Saharan country, which we fight against, okay? And outsiders don't always see it. There is activism, but the activist has to say outside. Now, in the case of Cameroon particularly, there were 2 men arrested in his case. We don't talk about the second one. He has also been released. And you know what? He went back to the ruling party, who jailed him. There is no room for political opposition in Cameroon. If you want to leave, you cannot be in a political opposition. You have to join the ruling party. Biya has established a solidarity within the group. Everyone has eaten piece of it and fear about the breakdown of the system. And everyone try to join it because that's the only way you can survive. And there are other allegations about how he manipulates the CC system, but it's very strong. And if you want to be efficient, you need to understand the mechanism in place and design an appropriate strategy. If you function as a Westerner, you are dead. I'm sorry.
Well, that's a really great way to end on a positive note. Thanks to everyone again, for coming. If there are any questions or follow-up, definitely feel free to reach out to me. I'm in touch with these guys. I'm happy to put you in touch, help answer any questions. And thanks to Jared, to Roland, to Malik, and to, of course, our friend Michelle for being here today. We really appreciate it. We're continue to be inspired by you, and we look forward to continue working with you. Thank you so much.
Sure, we can give you a copy. The conviction has been filed as a policy. This is ready to go. I emailed back and forth with Mary a couple of times. To get the other releases, but I haven't filed before, so what I'd like to do is make sure that everything is correctly. You guys are.
Sure, yeah, absolutely. Yeah, she's in Europe right now. We're putting together a big report.
No, but just, it's not,